So way back, one of my friends had gotten a Oculus dev kit from the Kickstarter, and that was really cool. But when I tried it out, it just kind of felt like a gimmick. Like honestly, with the Xbox controllers and the original setup, I was kind of like, ah, this is awkward. And usually you're sitting in a chair because it only had two sensors by default. So people develop for the default, not the enthusiast buy two extra sensors. So and even to turn around, you're mostly using analog stick controls for something like rotation. So it was definitely cool, but I wasn't inspired. But then my girlfriend at the time, who was working at a game studio, introduced me to the Vive, and that was a life-changing event. Basically, introducing the hand controllers and like fully spatially tracked, pretty accurately, room scale was like, whoa, there's something here. And I didn't know what, but I knew that I did want to make a VR game. That was going to be my next project. So I immediately went back and bought a Vive system and started playing around. Should I make an RTS? Should I make a first person shooter? Should I make some sort of a puzzle game? I eventually started, I worked on an RTS for a bit and it just didn't feel quite right, even though it's sort of it seems like, especially back then, people really had much fewer ideas about VR than we have now, and even now, people aren't too sure what to do with the platform. Uh, Even though it seems like RTS would fit the VR perspective, like a god looking down, it just felt kind of clunky. Maybe it's like are you standing awkwardly, or more likely, are you sitting on the ground? It was kind of strange. It was cool, but again, sort of felt gimmicky and not like a true expansion using the capabilities of VR. I really wanted to make a game that VR thrived, not just was a different way to experience. So I kind of moved from that project to sort of a puzzle game. I worked on a sort of a break out of prison simulator game for a while. I developed some fun ideas for conversation where you would throw different chat bubbles at the different people you were talking to, and the way you threw it would have impacts, something like that. Anyways, during this time, some dating sims or even just trailers of dating sims. I remember seeing the trailer for was it Summer Nights? It was going to be like a PlayStation game, I think, for VR that had like head shaking and nodding, which was really cute. But overall, watching the whole thing, it didn't seem like there was too much depth. And in my own personal interest, skill based mechanics that you find everywhere else with games. So I was complaining about it a lot. And at some point, my girlfriend at the time said, "Well, maybe we should make a dating sim game." And I had never considered it before because, well, it's not a very respected genre. There's, definitely a lot of incredible games made in that genre, but far outweighed, at least in social perception, by less tasteful and clunky, cash grab type games. And whether that's, truly the case or not didn't matter, but, I kind of had a mental block. And at that point, I was like, actually, yeah, I think I would like to work on something that has a kind of deep narrative focus that also revolves around romance in some way. And I definitely have always felt like I have interesting things to say about dating culture and how it could reflect that in game mechanics was really exciting. So we got to work. We actually brought in a third person, a programmer. My girlfriend was a very talented 3D artist, and we worked on it for probably as long as like a year before I underwent a change. And I tease a lot of programmers for going through this. It was me moving from much more of a noob stage to a intermediate level of programming, and there was a lot that was drawing my attention away from progressing the game incrementally. I was getting really into interactive fiction and interactive storytelling groups, trying to contend with what dialogue systems were, could be, and getting really frustrated by what it existed. Not that it wasn't good, just that it didn't line up with what the experience I had with other games, with League of Legends or, or Halo or um, StarCraft, some of my more, more often played games. There was a lot of strategy and finesse and like an area for creative expression that I did not find in really any dialogue system, even the more complicated ones that have done really incredible things. And so I finally started to make these comparisons a way that could inspire design, or at least try to. And what I came up with was, okay, in order for there to be creative expression and dialogue choice, you have to make it so that in some contexts, the same dialogue choice is good or bad. Now, that's really tough to do because most dialogue systems are limited by a lot of factors, but let's take it one step at a time. So how do you make, sometimes a dialogue choice is good, sometimes a dialogue choice is bad? Well, you can be inspired by D&D and basically do a variable check. Maybe you're growing a romance stat of some kind over the time of the game. And so if it comes time to like ask the girl out or something like that, it will check that value. So in some cases you would have a high enough stat for that to go through, and other times not. But most games wouldn't actually do it like that. They would gate getting to that stage where you could ask a girl out by whether you would be able to or not. So that wasn't really common. And the other problem is that in order to progress towards a strategic goal, you need clear feedback, and almost every dialogue system is built upon not giving clear feedback. The immediate response to that, when I would kind of bring up some of these complaints, and again, I didn't really have a solution at the time, but I was really just trying to engage the discussion in a new direction. But the reaction I would get at the time is something like, well, the feedback you get is the written dialogue that the AI says back to you. And although it's one of the richer forms of, art content, like you were talking about writing, sometimes you're talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of words in a game, even without significantly branching dialogue. But with branching dialogue, at least in a depth sense, it's much more than that. So they would say, the reaction, the feedback that the player is getting is in the AI's reaction, except that the dialogue is actually arbitrary. You have no idea as a player, unless the game gives you some sort of interface or feedback, whether that AI is choosing from multiple things to say. So it could be that if you say dialogue A, she will always say reaction A. So if that's the case, then there's, even if the player gets options, there's no strategy going on. It's an illusion of choice, which is a big problem. It's also a big solution. There's a huge content problem with writing in any game, and especially branching writing, tricks or shortcuts, or really just optimizations. Like it's really an incredible job. And I'm not here to say that anyone's been dumb. It's a really difficult thing to come out on the other side with anything that works and is possible to achieve. So anyways, yeah, so that's not a solution to the game system problem of is there strategy and dialogue choice where there isn't without clear feedback, and giving written, you say hi and the AI says, I hate you. That's not clear feedback, even though you're getting a significant emotion. It could, in fact, be the best or the worst or always the same response there. And most games wouldn't tell you the difference. And you might not know until you replay the game. And you might not know until you replay the game many times and consult with other people, because that information, in many ways, is not known until you've eliminated all the possible influencers of that reaction. Usually there aren't many, but sometimes there are. So we moved past that. So that's not a solution. So what would a solution be? Well, you have to find a way to visualize to the player what that is. So what I'm currently messing around with is a system that will, in a very brief animation, show you a 0 to 10 rating bar. And on that rating bar are all the AI reactions in that moment. So think of it as a text chat exchange. You say something, she's reacting to what you're saying, and her reaction involves a visualization of, okay, she's actually choosing between two different options, a sort of a higher option and a lower option, something like that. And you see the animation play out where her little reaction meter is fighting between those two those two options. And then once it rests on one of the options based on what you say, maybe based on the relationship you've built up to that point, then it snaps to that, and that's the reaction you see. And even though you don't know what the other thing she would have said is, in fact, it could be the exact same, or, maybe it's the difference between you asking, a girl how she's doing, like, are you okay? And she says, maybe the lower option is I'm fine, and the higher option is, yeah, I'm okay. And the I'm okay represents, more of a very, very mild encouragement of the player to, I guess, prod her for, to elaborate if she wants to, something like that. It could be like the narrowest of differences, but even with that, that would be a meaningful distinction that the player could experience happening. They could, they could choose something that they want to say. That's not all player strategy is based on results. Sometimes you just see something in a dialogue choice that's crazy or resonates with you, and you choose that, even if you know it's not an option that will result well. And you can see that play out. You can see how that impacts her decision, and you can see whether she's selecting one of the higher, one of the lower, and this scales. So you could have, in an important moment, you could have many options in there. You could have her deciding, in many shades of gray, or quite violently, maybe it's a tense moment and she has to decide whether she's accepting or rejecting or betraying or sacrificing for you. And that might justify quite a significant fragmentation. And I think it will be beautiful to visualize that to the player, because they can know what's going on. So anyways, that I feel is very important. And I became not just confident, but very overconfident about the power of such a system. I believed in it with everything that I had, which caused some problems. It made me less devoted to the game itself and more to the ideas on how dialogue systems could be changed in the abstract, which is something that I rail against programmers for now, but at the time I was very much in the self-congratulatory back, patting my own back about what I had stumbled onto. So I moved away from building just a simple tool to integrate these conversations into the game, and more so like, how can I redesign the tool, not just for me to use to create conversation or collaborate with someone, but to bring more writers or more interactive fiction community members or anyone into the field to make dialogue within my system. I redesigned the tool many, many times over many years. Most of the 5 years that I've spent developing this game have been purely orbiting this dialogue system and how it could be easier for the writer to focus on what they need to, but stay within the system because of the benefits that you get, especially the deeper into the branching or the farther along the game gets, is my theory. I'm still in the middle of, proving this theory for sure. So I went pretty deep, and at a certain point it became clear that the game wasn't just slowing down in its progress. It was really going in reverse. I was, redoing and undoing work to support new features that I wanted. I wanted to break up the meaning of a sentence and allow the player to say multiple things in a row that then the AI would have multiple reactions to, that would get chained together into a lot of different ways, which, again, very exciting, very programmery. but very technically challenging, especially for me at the time, who I was only just becoming an intermediate programmer, and I'm probably still on in that phase, though probably at the upper end of intermediate. But anyways, the project had been going on a year, and it was not really close to any sort of demoable stage. And gameplay content wasn't that inspiring either. It was me wrestling with the first like 3 or 4 exchanges of a conversation, and it, being, a worthy project for myself, but not a game, not yet. So it made more sense to, express how I was feeling. Despite all of this lack of tangible progress, it was very intangible, wrestling with ideas. And despite the idea that the team really did believe in me and us, as a team, I was more committed to the ideas than the project. So it made more sense to part ways. I continued working on developing the writing tool and trying to see if I could, get the support and attention of my peers. And they moved on to other projects that would, be more useful of their talents and closer to what they were actually looking to accomplish. And I think we left it on a good note. And I think it was tough. I really abandoned the team's initial goals, but even in light of that, I still wanted to do what I wanted to do. And that's okay. That's sometimes how projects go. You become inspired by a spinoff, and sometimes that's more important. So anyways, really 4 years, maybe 3 years after that, I had learned a very tough and time expensive lesson, which is that you can't just create a writing tool for what I thought was a revolutionary dialogue, player choice, AI reaction system. You can't just create the writing tool and expect people to look at the math and be like, hey, that's some cool math. I would love to write in your system. That's not a thing. And in fact, I had criticized many people in the field doing the exact same thing for years. And I did the same exact thing. It's not a waste of time. I think that if you can inspire people with your ideas, that's a great thing. And you should totally make tools to inspire artists. I don't think that's a bad thing, but given the field and given the competition and given the fact that many of the people in the interactive storytelling or fiction or just writers in general had spent an entire lifetime, some of them, more than 30 or 40 years, maybe some more, a lot more than that even, going back to the days of Zork. And I know that wasn't the initial one, but that's just the one that comes to mind for me. Even years before that, people being like, wow, what I want the future of games to be is somehow wrapped up in dialogue or character relationships. And that's a really cool thing, but it wasn't a field that I could casually enter into for only a couple of years and take the world by storm. And that was very foolish of me to think otherwise. So at that point, my fiance at the time, had encouraged me for a while, not just because she was on the project, but also because she saw this happening and me criticizing people for doing the same thing, that I really should come back and work on the game. And that resonated with me very hard, but I continued to be frustrated for a long time that the writing tool couldn't be accepted at face value by a lot of these great minds that I respected. I thought that they would see the truth, and I'm not saying that I knew for certain at the time or even now that my way is the final destination for any of these ideas. What I saw was a couple big problems that I think my system solves. Problems of clear player feedback and the nuance to allow players to have creative expression in a field where dialogue choice usually has only positive or negative effects when you choose one option over the other, and introducing a lot more complexity I'm hoping will solve that in order to allow players to be creatively expressing and also see the strategic effects of those decisions. Anyways, so eventually the message got through, and I set out to work on the game again. I took down different apps that I had uploaded for the writing tool called Electra, and a website with a whole database structure where you would make an account and then be able to upload. During this time, also had a kid, and that was life changing as well, as you would expect. I anticipated having pretty much no time for creative projects like this, especially as time consuming as something that had taken 3 or 4 years, but was not in any sort of done stage and really still in the experimental theoretical place. So instead of truly following through on the vision of creating the game, I convinced myself that, well, I'm really not going to have very much time soon. So what makes the most sense is to make the most approachable writing tool, but purely for myself this time, that maybe I can even make a mobile version of, so I can take it around with me on my phone. I could create a automatic dialogue saving system so that it will get loaded into the game, and I can purely just do writing for the game. But since my writing system is developed, it will essentially launch the game very easily and control all the things that happen in the game and allow me to keep working on it even in a casual amount of time. So I basically pushed one more time in that direction, and things got really weird. I made all sort of abstract representations of data structures, with just simple shapes like circles, triangles, squares, to try and reduce the data that would go into the game to such an abstract level that I was able to dream that I could write one linear conversation and draw out variables until it became a dynamic system that could apply to all the different AI characters, which was pretty ridiculous to work on. But I was facing a lot of well, the fear that I wasn't going to be able to work on my dream project anymore, even if it hadn't gone as well as I had hoped by that point. I still really loved the ideas and was still very committed to seeing, what could be possible at the end of the day. So I did that, and it went worse than than any of my previous attempts. It was so abstract, it was completely unwieldy, and I had a couple interesting visuals going on, but was mostly even less usable than some of my earlier versions from years ago had been as far as a writing tool goes. So that was tough, and represented a tough time where I drifted away from the project too. I had another big idea in terms of what could be done with a location based VR uh, game, really platform, and pursued that for a little bit, but continually found myself drawn back to this Electra writing system, or Double Demons VR dating sim game. And this at this point, my wife at the time uh, suggested to me that I make the game. I had already made the point many times and had come to appreciate my own advice you know to the many interactive storytelling visionaries and people doing experimental theoretical stuff, that's all great to develop theories, but you have to put it into practice if you're going to change anything, or show what could be done with one approach or one theory. So it really struck hard at that point. And about a year ago, I started working on a new reboot of the project. Of course, this time at this point, a lot more experience, not just with programming, but the quirks, upsides, and downsides of the specific system, because I'd been rebuilding and thinking about this way of doing dialogue for about 4.5 4 years now. So regardless of whether it was good or not, I knew it extremely well and I knew what I needed to move it forward. So I finally found that creating the writing tool just purely within a custom editor Unity script was like child's play compared to everything that I was trying to do beforehand. It was ridiculously easy to get the core feature set that I needed to transform writing into the Electra conversation system, and that's where I am now. I'm about a year into this reboot, and I'm feeling really good about it. I'm feeling like I want to start telling people not about the writing tool this time, but the actual game. I feel like it's still early along in terms of the amount of playable content, but mechanically, almost everything is complete to a certain degree. You've got dialogue choice, and you've got the sub expression of those dialogue choices. You've got AIs reacting to that. And I've got the whole feedback, the clear feedback system, which is what I've always dreamed of trying to do, where the player can, in a fairly quick animation, see the impact of what they're saying, the AI's reaction, and where that reaction lines up to what the AI will actually say. And I think I've done it in a way that it is possible to be approached by me as a writer and by others as a writer. So I am excited to explain and share more of the project. It's called Double Demon. It's a VR dating sim. You're a high school student by day, and you fight monsters in the spirit world by night. All specifically designed, and the story is very much inspired by a lot of things, but everything is around the idea of bringing this conversation system, this relationship building game, to its fullest form that I can manage. So I'm really excited about it, and I hope you'll stay tuned for further updates and for further theory explorations. Thanks for listening to my backstory.